I was a little bit, not a little bit, I was stumped about what to talk about today, so I was asking for suggestions. And Venerable Lamsal said very sweetly, as she does, how about moving towards suffering? And I kind of did a flip response, because I don't think I have that experience. I can't talk about it. But that's not accurate. Not accurate in two ways. One, can you guess? Those desiring to escape from suffering hasten right towards suffering. With the very desire for happiness out of delusion, they destroy their own happiness as if it were an enemy. It's Shantideva saying that, of course, if I move towards suffering. I move towards suffering like daily. I could almost say moment to moment, but that's not exactly true either. But yeah, we move towards suffering by creating it and by being ignorant about what causes it. We know none of us want suffering. We know we all want to be happy. And yet, in any given moment, we're so confused or not paying attention enough. Both, those of us who have learned the Dharma, we know this at some level, but we're not paying attention enough to recognize that in our attempt to be happy, we're creating negative karma. That is the cause for more suffering. So, the things we try to do to stop our suffering just create negativity, like when we are suffering because somebody else assaulted us, what do? We insult them back, generally speaking. And does that create the cause for happiness or suffering? Suffering, of course. If someone, even puts the spatula in the wrong place and we get mad and yell at somebody else in the kitchen, we're just trying to relieve the anxiety of not finding the darn spatula. But it's creating more cause for suffering. So on that level, moving towards suffering is actually very much in my experience. I lied when I said it wasn't. But I think what she meant was another idea of actually moving towards suffering as opposed to avoiding it as a way of practice. And in truth, I can't say that I moved toward it, but for about the last year more intensively, I've been looking at accepting suffering. So my flip remark wasn't true in that case either. There are three kinds of fortitude. And so it's falling within this practice of cultivating fortitude. The fortitude not to retaliate when harmed, the fortitude to bear suffering, and the fortitude to practice the Dharma. And last year when I was studying with Geshe Soltram Gyaltsen, we spent weeks and weeks and weeks on the Lamrim Chenmo on the perfection of patience or fortitude. And I was very moved by that in-depth teaching. So of course that was weeks, and I can't do that in a BBC, but there are a few points here that I wanted to bring up with this move towards suffering. Because we can't move towards suffering as a form of practice until we've learned to accept our suffering, until we're not lashing back as soon as it comes up, or not bursting out in tears, pain, complaint when it arises. First comes acceptance, and then we can do more. And why? Because, again, Shantideva says the causes of happiness sometimes occur, whereas the causes of suffering occur frequently. So since it's so much a part of our life at this point, best that we learn to accept and really take it on the path. So a main point of learning to accept suffering in all of its levels, from the very mildest irritation, the mildest discomfort, not so happy mind, the temperature's not right, the food's not hot enough, they didn't make the thing that I like, but they made the thing I can't eat. Those kinds of things that are our sufferings that arise moment by moment by moment. To, you just receive a diagnosis of a terminal illness and you're way far down the path. Those are maybe among the worst. Well, there's actually worse. But we can think of that as a big suffering. From that whole range of those sufferings, that's what we need to learn to accept. So it's not just the big ones. It's learning to accept the little ones too as they arise. And we have many, many opportunities to do that. Lama Tsongkhapa lays out 3 points that are very interesting. If we don't learn to accept suffering as it arises, then what happens? Immediately, we have the additional suffering of all the worry that comes on top of it. All the worry, what's going to happen to me, why did this happen, I didn't deserve this, all the complaining, this should never happen to me, I'm not a person who deserves suffering, I'm a practitioner, for goodness sake, why has this happened? Blah, that whole mind. The second point being the kind of person that if you just accept suffering and let it be, then that extra layer of pain, the extra arrow, as Venerable Sangye Kadra was teaching us a few weeks ago, the extra arrow that comes when we're responding to the suffering that comes to us is not there. So at least the basic suffering, you can just observe it and experience it in a simple way, and what? It will always pass. Always. And then the third point of view then is that since you're using a method to bring even basic suffering onto the path, then when we use our suffering to further our practice, we actually has the side effect of greatly lessening it, at least in the mental level, and very likely, very often on the physical level as well. So Geshe Gelsen's example I thought was very useful. So he was saying so imagine you have 3 people who have just received a really serious advanced cancer diagnosis. Or I was trying to imagine it more contemporaneously, like suppose you have 3 people who are seriously running for elected office and it's the day later and they've lost by 7 votes or something. Both are major, major suffering minds. But let's go with the illness because that's the easiest one to grasp. So the first person, in that first framework where we have the worry, the first person that says, oh, now I have this disease. What will happen to me? This is the worst thing that could ever possibly happen. I can't bear this. The people around me can't bear this. We have that mind that simply reacts in such a pained way. And it's real. It's genuine suffering. It's not to put that down in any way. And it's also a mind that is increasing the level of suffering that we're experiencing the more we let it run. And that can be about cancer, or that can be about what somebody just said something about me that wasn't true, that I don't think was true. We do the same thing. Why did they say that? Why would they think that? Why do they believe that about me? Who do they think they are? That's the mind that's causing us an additional layer of suffering. Whereas the second person, he said, you can just accept this cancer. Many others are suffering too. I'm not the only one. There are treatments. We can just move forward with a simple, clean mind and see what unfolds. That's another level. And then the third person says, oh, okay, I have this cancer diagnosis. Now this is arising due to causes and conditions. Among those causes and conditions are the fact that it's my own past negative actions that are ripening here. So whatever suffering I experience, may my own non-virtue be purified, and may my suffering be able to purify the suffering of all sentient beings. And we bring that mind of bodhicitta, trying to benefit others, practicing Tonglen, onto the path with our suffering. And so what's the result of these 3 mind states? Clearly, the first one is just more pain. The second one is a level of acceptance, which is good. And then the third one is then not only acceptance, but then actually moving towards the suffering and making it very useful. I came across a quote by Pema Chodron that I liked quite a lot around this. She says, we think that the point is to pass the test or overcome the problem. Like, okay, suffering has come. Now if I just figure it out, work it out, it'll all be fine. And that's the point. The point is to figure it out and get on with it. Or to pass the test, solve the problem. But, she says, the truth is things don't really get solved. The truth is things come together and they fall apart. They come together again and they fall apart again. It's just like that. The healing comes from letting there be room for all of this to happen. Room for grief, room for relief, room for misery, room for joy. So again, from Shantideva, where he says, in the chapter on anger, but not in this context, he says, such are their conditions, and be at ease. And that's the true with ourselves. So if we can be thinking about from the point of view of how, oh gosh, it seems like such the quintessential teaching these days, in my mind anyway, how everything arises due to causes and conditions. It's rising, biting, ceasing, arising, biting, and ceasing, arising, biting, and ceasing. There is no problem. There is no test to pass. There is no solution to be figured out. It's just continually participating. It's not like we passively let them, we can't. We're part of the causes and conditions, everything we do. But we're participating in this law of causality, participating in things arising, abiding, and ceasing, experiencing the results of our own actions, experiencing the kindness of others, generating an open heart or generating a closed heart. That's our response, and then we create more causes. So to stay in that stream of causality seems to me, for me, a practice that I'm trying to do, to be able to accept the suffering as it arises, to accept the happiness as it arises, knowing that it doesn't happen very often, whereas the suffering arises frequently. So thank you for the tip. That's what I have to share today.